let's talk a little bit more about that universe, shall we? You know, the one we live in. If you start to think about it and really look at it, what's going on around us, you start to realize that everything around us has been finely tuned to a very specific degree. You know, we hear scientists talk about this sometimes, you know, astrophysicists and, you know, the guys that look up. And they talk about how planets typically have to be for them to have life on them, have to be in what's called the Goldilocks zone. You know, that's that distance from its orbiting star that's not too hot and not too cold. You know, the Earth happens to be there. And then you also probably remember from school that the Earth is at a particular axis. It's spinning on an axis at a particular set of degrees. And it's also spinning at a particular speed. And it's going around the sun in a very, very carefully dictated orbit. But what if I told you those are the little things? There are some numbers and some degrees and some math here that's even more insurmountable than that. Take this one, for example, the atomic weak force. You might not have heard of that, and I don't even fully understand it myself because, well, I'm not an astrophysicist. But the atomic weak force is basically a law that allows fusion to take place. You've heard of fusion, right? It's what stars do. Our sun's a star. We kind of need that. Okay. Scientists have discovered that, and you can look this up for yourself, but scientists have discovered that in order for the atomic weak force to function, which would allow fusion, which allows life, okay, it has to be finely tuned down to 1 in 10 to the 100th power. Let me explain that number just a minute for just a minute for those of you who might not be following me. 10 to the 100th power. That's a 1 with 100 zeros after it. 100. 1 in that. Try thinking about that number for a minute. Pretty big, right? But that's not even the biggest. Not even close, really. There's another one about the expansion rate of the universe. You see, the universe is expanding, it's growing, and it's doing so at a particular speed. And in order for life to exist, that speed has to be set. It has to be expanding at a certain rate. And that rate has been finely tuned down to 1 in 10 to the 120th power. Again, that's a 1 with 120 zeros after it. That's a huge number. And there are even more than that. You can look them up for yourselves, but just those two alone are enough to let us know that this universe, in order for us to live in it and exist in it, has to have been finely tuned down to a razor's edge, or there's no life at all. Okay, we get it. The universe is finely tuned. But how? Not so much why. I think we get why, because all of these things have to function and work in order for us to be alive. That's why. I think a far better question is how. How did they get that finely tuned? Well, maybe you're thinking of some possible answers. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, maybe it's that way because it has to be. It has to be that way. The laws of nature dictate that it has to be finely tuned like this. This is a way of saying it's finely tuned by necessity. And a lot of people go this route. They think that maybe there's a theory out there, a so-called theory of everything, that will explain how the universe is the way it is. Okay? But there's a problem with that. You see, in order for the laws to dictate how the laws are so finely tuned, well, how can they do that? How can they dictate to themselves in their own system? Seems to me that whatever caused the universe to be this finely tuned to such a degree, it would have to be outside of those laws, external to them. They can't do it themselves. Think of it this way. You ever had to tune up your engine? You know, dial it in just right because maybe it was firing a little bit out of sequence? You took it to a mechanic, right? You didn't just expect your engine to do that itself, did you? Okay. Maybe you're thinking, okay, if it's not necessity, if it doesn't just have to be that way, chance. Maybe chance. Maybe it just happened. You know, we rolled the dice and this is what we came up with. Think about those numbers we talked about a minute ago. 10 to the 100th power. 1 in 10 to the 100th power. 1 with 100 zeros. 1 in 10 to the 120th power. 1 with 120 zeros. How many times do you think you'd have to roll the dice to get that number? And how many times? I mean, that's just 2 examples. There are way more than 2. Some people try to say, well, maybe a multiverse then. Okay. Now, imagine the multiverse is this. Maybe there are a bunch of different universes out there. Maybe we're not the only one. And they all exist kind of next to each other, kind of like bubbles in a big ball of soap in the top of your dishwasher. And each bubble is a universe. And maybe in some, they're not finely tuned. And there are just enough universes to get us down to this one in which it worked. Well, that doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it just makes it way, way more complicated. I mean, think about all the numbers that will be associated with the multiverse if just one universe has numbers like this in it. Okay, so if necessity's out and chance is out, well, how about design? That one's interesting. I want you to imagine for a second that you're walking in the woods with your friend and you look down in the dirt path and you see a pocket watch sitting there, ticking away, tick, 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 keeping the time at a rhythm. And you look at the pocket watch and you say to your friend, how did this watch get here? And your friend says, well, obviously somebody dropped it. And you say, no, how did this watch come to be? And your friend says, well, maybe it just has to be. And you say, no, that doesn't seem to make any sense. And then your friend says, well, maybe all of the pieces of this watch, in order to make it exist and tick the way it does, maybe they just fell together by accident, by chance. No, that doesn't seem right either, does it? But then your friend says, well, maybe somebody made it. Maybe a designer put that watch together in just the right way. Obviously, it makes sense if we're talking about a watch, because it's a watch, right? But you know what's interesting? The logic of that process stays the same no matter how big or finely tuned the watch is. If it's a pocket watch, it works, but it also works if it's not a pocket watch. It also works if it's the universe that we're talking about, because it's even more finely tuned than that. So design. But again, what does design require? A designer.